I'm Stephanie Morgan, 32 years old, and the founder of Health Pulse Technologies. After building my company from the ground up for 5 years, taking it to a $40 million valuation, my newly hired CEO, Brandon, fired me from my own company. You should have seen the smirk on his face when he said, "You are dismissed, effective immediately." What he conveniently forgot was that I still owned 92% of the company shares. If you want to hear how I turned that shareholder meeting into the sweetest professional revenge ever witnessed, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, the daughter of a nurse and a high school math teacher. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't rich either. From an early age, I showed a knack for both science and business that surprised my parents. While other kids were setting up lemonade stands, I created a neighborhood subscription service, delivering homemade health smoothies to elderly residents twice weekly. By 16, I had 3 other teens working for me and was making more money than I did at my part-time teacher's aide job at school. College was always the plan, but paying for it was the challenge. Through a combination of scholarships, part-time jobs, and my small business savings, I managed to attend the University of Michigan to study biomedical engineering. The coursework was brutal, and juggling multiple jobs to stay afloat meant I often survived on 4 hours of sleep. But those years taught me something critical. I could endure almost anything if I believed in what I was working toward. During my junior year, my grandmother was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Watching her struggle with the daily management of her condition, the constant glucose monitoring, medication schedules, and dietary tracking sparked an idea. For my senior project, I designed a simple, integrated health monitoring system that combined various tracking functions into one user-friendly interface. My professors were impressed, but more importantly, my grandmother could actually use it without frustration. After graduation, I spent 2 years working for a major medical device company. The experience was valuable but stifling. My ideas for more accessible, user-friendly health technology were repeatedly shelved in favor of minor improvements to existing products with established profit margins. I understood the business logic but couldn't accept that this was the best way to serve patients. The breaking point came during a product development meeting when my direct supervisor, Frank, shot down my proposal for a simplified health monitoring system similar to my senior project. "Patients don't want simplicity, Stephanie," he said dismissively. "They want to feel like they're getting sophisticated medical care. Complexity sells at premium prices." I submitted my resignation the following week and cashed out my modest 401k, accepting the penalty to fund my startup. Working from my tiny one-bedroom apartment, I refined my original concept into what would become Health Pulse's flagship product, an integrated health monitoring system designed specifically for older adults and those with chronic conditions. The early days were brutal. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, coding until 3 o'clock in the morning, then waking at 7 o'clock to make cold calls to potential investors. My parents worried about my health and financial security, gently suggesting that perhaps I should return to a real job and develop my ideas on the side. But I knew that wouldn't work. This required full commitment. My first real break came 8 months in when I managed to secure a meeting with Andrea Wells, a partner at Horizon Ventures specializing in healthcare technology. She had a reputation for taking chances on female founders, which was rare in the male-dominated venture capital world. The meeting didn't go as planned. Andrea was brutally honest about the flaws in my business model and the limitations of my technical approach. But instead of simply rejecting me, she gave me homework, specific issues to address and return with solutions in 30 days. I worked around the clock to solve every problem she identified, skipping weekends and social events to perfect my pitch and prototype. When I returned, Andrea was impressed enough to offer $200,000 in seed funding in exchange for 6% equity. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to rent a small office space, hire 2 part-time developers, and create a proper prototype. That's when Gregory Walker entered the picture. I met him at a healthcare innovation conference where I was showcasing our prototype. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding confidence, he introduced himself as an angel investor with a background in medical technology sales. He asked insightful questions about our product and seemed genuinely excited about our mission of making health technology more accessible. Over coffee the next day, Gregory offered to invest $350,000 for a small equity stake and to join as our sales advisor. His experience seemed invaluable. He had successfully launched medical devices in markets across North America and Europe. With Andrea's approval, I accepted his offer, giving him a 2% equity stake. The next 18 months were a whirlwind of progress. With Gregory's guidance on sales strategy and Andrea's business connections, we secured partnerships with 3 regional healthcare systems to pilot our technology. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, particularly from elderly patients, who found our interface intuitive where they had struggled with competitors' products. By our second year, we had expanded to 15 employees, moved to a proper office in a converted warehouse space, and were generating modest but growing revenue. Health Pulse was becoming known in the industry as an innovative upstart worth watching. I was working 16-hour days but loving every minute of building something meaningful. As we prepared for our Series A funding round, both Andrea and Gregory suggested that we needed to strengthen our executive team. Investors will want to see experienced leadership, Andrea explained. Your technical vision is brilliant, Stephanie, but scaling a company requires different skills than founding one. I understood the logic but was hesitant to dilute my control. I had seen too many stories of founders pushed aside once investors and executives took over. After much discussion, we reached a compromise. We would hire a chief operating officer, Ku, with experience scaling healthcare startups, but I would remain CEO and maintain clear majority ownership. The search for our Ku led us to Brandon Hayes, who had recently helped guide a medical software company through rapid growth to acquisition. His resume was impeccable: Harvard MBA, successful exits from 2 previous startups, and glowing references from industry leaders. During interviews, he expressed genuine enthusiasm for our mission and promised to respect the company culture I had built. "I'm not here to change what makes Health Pulse special," he assured me during our final interview. "I'm here to help you scale it without losing your founding vision. Too many companies lose their soul during growth. I want to make sure that doesn't happen here." I was impressed and relieved. With Brandon handling operations, I could focus more on product development and innovation, my true passions. We announced his hiring with fanfare, and the industry took notice. Our Series A round closed oversubscribed, raising $5 million at a $20 million valuation. I maintained 92% ownership. Giving up additional equity had been a red line for me, and both Andrea and Gregory had supported this stance. The honeymoon period with Brandon lasted about 3 months. At first, the changes he implemented seemed reasonable: more structured reporting processes, formalized meeting schedules, professional development plans for employees. The office began to feel more like a real company and less like a startup, which was appropriate for our growth stage. But gradually, subtle shifts appeared. The open-door policy I had established began to close as Brandon instituted hierarchical communication channels. Weekly all-hands meetings where anyone could raise concerns became monthly presentations where executives spoke and employees listened. The casual, collaborative atmosphere that had fueled our innovation was giving way to something more corporate and rigid. When I raised concerns, Brandon had logical explanations for every change. "We're not a 5-person startup anymore, Stephanie. We can't have everyone involved in every decision. Scale requires structure." His arguments made sense on paper, but something felt wrong about the direction we were heading. By the end of our first year with Brandon as Ku, Health Pulse had grown to 40 employees and was preparing to launch our second-generation product. From the outside, we looked like a success story: growing revenue, expanding team, positive industry coverage. But internally, the culture was transforming into something I barely recognized, and my role was increasingly being reduced to that of a figurehead rather than a leader. I didn't realize then that this was just the beginning of a systematic effort to push me out of the company I had created from nothing. Health Pulse Technologies wasn't just another health monitoring system. We had created something truly different. While competitors focused on collecting more data or adding features that looked impressive in sales presentations, we obsessed over user experience, particularly for those with limited technology comfort or physical limitations. Our flagship product, the Health Pulse Hub, combined multiple monitoring functions: glucose, blood pressure, medication tracking, activity into a single intuitive interface with a simplified physical design. The large buttons, high contrast screen, and voice command options made it accessible to elderly users, while the sophisticated back-end analytics provided healthcare providers with actionable insights. What truly set us apart was our companion app that allowed family members to remotely support their loved ones' health management. Adult children could help elderly parents track medications, monitor concerning trends, and share relevant information with healthcare providers. This care circle approach resonated deeply with families struggling to support aging relatives while balancing their own busy lives. Early success came from small but significant decisions. Rather than targeting individual consumers first, we focused on healthcare systems and senior living communities, allowing us to deploy at scale while gathering valuable usage data. Instead of charging premium prices, we adopted a moderate hardware cost with a subscription model, making the initial purchase more accessible while building recurring revenue. Our first major contract came from Lakeside Senior Communities, a regional chain of assisted living facilities. Their residents experienced a 30% reduction in missed medications and a 25% decrease in preventable hospital readmissions during our 6-month pilot. Those results opened doors throughout the industry. I led product development personally, spending countless hours conducting user testing with elderly participants, including my grandmother, who remained our most honest critic. "This button is still too small, Stephanie," she would say, or "Why does it need 3 steps when one would do?" Her feedback shaped our relentless focus on simplicity. My role evolved as the company grew. Initially, I did everything from coding to sales calls to ordering office supplies. As we added staff, I focused more on product vision, key partnerships, and company culture. I hired people who shared our mission of making health technology accessible to those traditionally left behind by tech innovation. Brandon Hayes entered our story during a critical growth phase. We were transitioning from a promising startup to an established company, and his experience seemed perfectly aligned with our needs. With his polished presentation style and impressive network, he immediately brought a new level of professionalism to our operations. Our initial relationship was collaborative and productive. Brandon respected my authority as CEO while providing valuable guidance on scaling operations. We had complementary skills, my product and technical expertise paired with his operational and financial acumen. The leadership team meetings were energizing, filled with healthy debate and creative problem solving. I genuinely liked Brandon. During those early months, he was charming, quick-witted, and seemed passionate about our mission. He went out of his way to learn everyone's names and professional interests. He even instituted Founder Fridays, where teams would share how their work connected to my original vision for the company. It felt like he truly valued the culture I had built. As we expanded, we hit significant milestones that validated our approach. Our user base surpassed 10,000 patients across 20 healthcare systems. We were featured in leading medical journals for improving medication adherence in chronically ill patients. Investment offers arrived regularly, but I consistently prioritized maintaining majority ownership over taking on more capital than necessary. This ownership strategy was deliberate. I had watched too many founders lose control of their companies after successive funding rounds diluted their stakes below 50%. By maintaining 92% ownership, with Andrea at 6% and Gregory at 2%, I ensured that my vision would guide Health Pulse's future. Brandon occasionally hinted that this capital structure limited our growth potential, but I stood firm on this principle. Our Series A funding came with pressure to add experienced voices to our board of directors. I agreed to expand the board from 3, myself, Andrea, and a medical advisor, to 5, adding a healthcare IT veteran and a former hospital administrator. These additions brought valuable industry perspective while maintaining a board that understood and supported our mission. The growth brought inevitable growing pains. We outgrew our original office and moved to a larger space. Departments that once consisted of 2 or 3 people now had dedicated managers. Communication became more formalized as direct access to every team member became logistically impossible. Some early employees struggled with the transition from startup chaos to structured organization. Through it all, I worked to preserve our core values: patient-centered design, accessibility for all users regardless of technical ability, and transparency in all aspects of our operation. We maintained traditions like monthly all-hands demos, where any employee could showcase work they were proud of, and quarterly volunteer days at senior centers to stay connected with our end users. Brandon, initially supportive of these practices, began suggesting modifications. We should make the all-hands more efficient, he proposed. Have department heads present instead of individual contributors. Or the volunteer days are valuable, but perhaps quarterly is too frequent given our workload. Each suggestion seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they represented a shift away from the company culture I had carefully cultivated. In retrospect, the warning signs were there from about 6 months into Brandon's tenure. During a leadership retreat, he presented a 5-year vision that diverged significantly from my founding mission. His plan emphasized aggressive expansion into consumer wearables, pharmaceutical partnerships, and data monetization areas I had intentionally avoided due to privacy concerns and our focus on underserved populations. When I questioned this direction, Brandon smoothly responded, "This is simply the natural evolution of your vision, Stephanie. We're not changing the mission, just expanding the means to achieve it." Several department heads nodded along already, won over by his charismatic presentation and promises of accelerated growth. That evening, I confided my concerns to Andrea during a private dinner. "Am I being too rigid?" I asked her. "Is this resistance just founder syndrome?" Andrea considered carefully before responding. "Some evolution is natural and necessary," she said, "but watch carefully for mission drift and, more importantly, watch the power dynamics. Brandon is building a following, and that's not inherently problematic unless it undermines your leadership." Her warning was prescient, though neither of us realized just how calculated Brandon's approach would prove to be. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, disguised as professional advancement and company growth. While I remained focused on our products and patients, Brandon was orchestrating a gradual but deliberate consolidation of internal influence that would eventually threaten everything I had built. The first clear sign that something was wrong came during an interview with Healthcare Innovations magazine. The journalist had requested to speak with me about our company's founding story and recent growth. Brandon suggested he join to add perspective on our operational expansion. I agreed, seeing it as a reasonable request from our coup. During the interview, however, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever I began explaining our technology or business strategy, Brandon would interject with phrases like, "What Stephanie means is ... or "Let me clarify what we're actually doing." He wasn't adding perspective. He was reframing my answers and subtly positioning himself as the true authority on our company's direction. When the article was published, I was dismayed to find myself described as the technical founder, while Brandon was characterized as the business visionary driving Health Pulse's market expansion. The journalist had clearly been influenced by Brandon's careful narrative shaping during our conversation. Around the same time, I noticed my calendar filling with less critical meetings while Brandon began representing Health Pulse at high-profile industry events that I had previously attended. "You're so valuable on the product side, Stephanie," he explained when I questioned this. "I'm just freeing you to focus on what you do best while I handle the external business matters." This division of responsibilities sounded logical, but it effectively isolated me from key industry relationships and investor connections I had built over years. Meanwhile, Brandon was becoming the public face of Health Pulse, with many new contacts unaware that he hadn't founded the company. The exclusion became more blatant with the formation of an executive strategy committee that somehow never seemed to meet at times I could attend. We tried to find a time that worked for everyone, Brandon's assistant would explain apologetically. We'll send you the minutes. Those minutes, when they arrived, were vague summaries that obscured the actual discussions and decisions. Critical changes began appearing as fait accompli. A new partnership with Pharma Global, a company I had previously declined to work with due to their controversial pricing practices, was announced in my absence. When I expressed concern, Brandon responded with mild surprise. We discussed the framework for this at the ESC meeting. Didn't you see that in the minutes? The board is quite excited about the revenue potential. Speaking of the board, I noticed a subtle shift in their dynamics as well. The two newest members, Martin Lewis from Healthcare IT and Diana Forrester, the former hospital administrator, increasingly sided with Brandon during discussions. They would arrive at meetings seemingly already briefed on proposals I was seeing for the first time, creating an uncomfortable dynamic where I appeared uninformed about my own company's initiatives. The most alarming development involved our company's direction. Our core mission had always been creating accessible health technology for underserved populations, particularly the elderly and those with chronic conditions. Brandon began pushing aggressively for what he called market expansion into premium consumer wearables and data partnerships with insurance companies, lucrative areas but far from our founding purpose. When I pushed back during a product roadmap meeting, Brandon's response was revealing. Stephanie, your vision got us here, and that's commendable, but we need to be realistic about growth expectations. The elder care market is limited. These new verticals are where the real money is. The statement wasn't just a strategic disagreement. It was a fundamental misunderstanding or rejection of why I had started Health Pulse in the first place. Behind the scenes, I later discovered Brandon had been building alliances through one-on-one meetings with key employees. He took senior engineers to expensive lunches, gave mid-level managers special projects reporting directly to him, and instituted a bonus structure that rewarded alignment with his new strategic priorities. People naturally gravitated toward the source of approval and advancement opportunities. The most troubling incident involved our chief financial officer, Melissa Chun. We had worked together since nearly the beginning, and she had always been straightforward with me. After returning from a closed-door meeting with Brandon, looking uncomfortable, she asked to speak with me privately. Stephanie, I need to tell you something concerning, she said once we were alone. Brandon asked me to prepare financial projections for a board presentation showing that our current year strategy leads to stagnation after year 3, while his proposed pivots show dramatic growth. Are those numbers accurate? I asked. Melissa hesitated. They're based on assumptions I wouldn't normally use. Very optimistic on his proposals and unnecessarily conservative on our current trajectory. When I questioned the models, he said he needed something compelling for the board, and that sometimes we need to lead with the narrative and let the numbers follow. This manipulation of financial projections to undermine my leadership crossed a line from professional disagreement into deliberate deception. I thanked Melissa for her honesty and began paying closer attention to the information being presented to the board and investors. I discovered several instances where my original presentations had been modified before distribution, with key metrics reframed to support Brandon's narrative of necessary change. Customer satisfaction data from our core elderly users was minimized, while speculative market analysis for new verticals was emphasized. Brandon's maneuvering extended to ownership discussions as well. During a meeting with potential strategic investors, he casually mentioned that, as we grow, we'll naturally need to consider a more conventional cap table. When I questioned him afterward, he brushed it off as hypothetical planning. But the message was clear. My unusual 92% ownership was on his radar as something to change. I began documenting these incidents, saving emails, recording meetings with appropriate notification, and keeping detailed notes of conversations. If this was heading where I suspected, I would need evidence beyond my word against his. I also maintained regular contact with Andrea, the one board member I still fully trusted, keeping her informed of my concerns. By this point, about 15 months after Brandon joined Health Pulse, the company culture had transformed dramatically. The collaborative, Mission-driven environment I had cultivated had given way to siloed departments competing for resources and recognition. Several original team members had left, citing changes in direction and atmosphere. New hires increasingly came from Brandon's network and seemed selected more for loyalty than alignment with our original mission. The tension became palpable. Staff members would fall silent when I entered rooms where they had been in animated conversation with Brandon. Executive team meetings featured strained politeness rather than the honest discussions we once had. Brandon maintained impeccable professional courtesy in public while systematically undermining my authority behind the scenes. I considered confronting him directly but realized it would likely accelerate his timeline without resolving the underlying issue. Instead, I focused on rebuilding relationships with key team members and documenting the divergence between our original mission and Brandon's new direction. If a showdown was coming, I needed allies and evidence. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Brandon would make his move or how brutally he would execute it. I had expected a continued war of attrition. Instead, he opted for a sudden coup, catching me off guard despite all my preparations. The betrayal hurt all the more because I had brought him into the company, given him authority and trust, and believed in his commitment to our shared mission. The lesson was painful but clear. In business, as in life, actions reveal true intentions far more reliably than words, no matter how eloquently those words are delivered. The day began unremarkably. It was a Tuesday in March, and I arrived at the office around 7:30 as usual, planning to review the latest user testing results before our 9 o'clock product team meeting. The office was quiet, with just a few early arrivals at their desks. I noticed immediately that Brandon's office light was on unusual as he typically arrived after 8:30. As I settled at my desk, my assistant Julia appeared at my door with a strained expression. "Good morning, Stephanie. Brandon asked to see you in the conference room when you arrived." Something in her tone sent a warning signal, but I thanked her and gathered my laptop. Walking to the conference room, I noticed several executive team members already gathered. In Brandon's office, Melissa from Finance, Robert, our CTO, and Diane from Marketing. They avoided eye contact as I passed another warning sign that something was amiss. The main conference room, ironically named Founder's Room, during our last office renovation, held Brandon, our head of HR, Patricia, and two men in suits I didn't recognize. No friendly greetings, just Brandon gesturing to a chair across from them. "Stephanie, thank you for joining us," Brandon began with a formal politeness that never reached his eyes. "I've called this meeting to discuss some difficult but necessary changes to Health Pulse's leadership structure." Before I could respond, he continued, "The board has been evaluating our growth trajectory and organizational needs. After careful consideration, we've determined that the company requires different leadership to achieve its potential at this stage." I interrupted. "The board? This is the first I'm hearing of any leadership discussion, and as CEO and majority shareholder, former CEO, Brandon corrected smoothly. "Effective immediately. The board has voted to remove you from the chief executive position and appoint me as CEO. Patricia has your separation agreement, and these gentlemen are from corporate security to assist with your transition out of the building." The shock must have shown on my face. Brandon had somehow orchestrated a board vote without my knowledge, something that should have been procedurally impossible given my position. "This is absurd," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I own 92% of this company. The board can't remove me without my participation." Brandon's smile contained not an ounce of warmth. "Actually, if you review Section 7.3 of the revised corporate bylaws approved last quarter, the board can remove officers with a simple majority vote if performance concerns are documented. We have extensively documented the concerns." My mind raced back to that board meeting. There had been a package of administrative updates to various corporate documents, presented as routine housekeeping. I had trusted our corporate counsel, whom Brandon had selected, when he assured us these were standard governance updates. I had not scrutinized every clause, a mistake I was now paying for dearly. "This is a hostile takeover of my own company," I said. "I won't accept this." "Your acceptance isn't required," Brandon replied. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items, then out of the building. Your company accounts have already been deactivated. The separation agreement offers 6 months' salary as severance, provided you sign a non-disparagement clause and waive any claims against the company or its officers. The humiliation was carefully choreographed. As security walked me to my desk, employees watched wide-eyed from behind monitors and glass-walled meeting rooms. Brandon had timed this for maximum visibility, ensuring everyone witnessed my fall from power. Julia stood by my desk, tears in her eyes, with a cardboard box for my personal belongings. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "No one knew this was happening." As I mechanically placed photos and personal items into the box, Brandon appeared to oversee the process. "We'll need your laptop and company phone, of course," he said. "Any files you need personally can be requested through legal after review for confidential information." The security guard stood uncomfortably nearby as I unpacked 5 years of my life from that desk. I caught glimpses of shocked faces, some sympathetic, others already calculating how this would affect their own positions. Brandon watched with barely concealed satisfaction, finally achieving the coup he had methodically planned for months. At the elevator, he delivered his parting shot. "For what it's worth, Stephanie, your technical contribution was valuable. But Health Pulse has outgrown its founding phase. We need professional management now, not sentimental attachment to original missions. I hope you'll sign the agreement and move on gracefully." The smirk that accompanied these words revealed his true character more clearly than anything before. This wasn't business. It was personal triumph. He had successfully outmaneuvered the founder and was savoring the moment. As the elevator doors closed between us, cutting off that smug expression, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock gave way to cold clarity. Brandon had made a catastrophic miscalculation, one that would prove fatal to his ambitions. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The tactical precision of the coup impressed even as it infuriated me. Brandon had systematically identified and exploited every vulnerability. My trust in the corporate council, my focus on product rather than governance, my assumption that majority ownership protected my position. The separation agreement sat unopened on the passenger seat. 6 months' salary for signing away my rights to the company I had built from nothing. The insult was almost as staggering as the injury. I drove directly to Andrea's office across town. Her assistant, recognizing me, immediately showed me in despite not having an appointment. Andrea looked up from her desk, surprised but quickly reading the situation from my expression. "What happened?" she asked simply. I explained the morning's events, watching her expression shift from concern to outrage. "This is absurd," she said when I finished. "I'm on the board and there was no vote to remove you." The last communication I received was about next week's quarterly meeting. That confirmed my suspicion that Brandon had falsified board approval, likely counting on executing the removal before anyone could verify his claims. He had moved more recklessly than I expected, perhaps worried that I was catching on to his machinations. "What do you need from me?" Andrea asked. "First, confirmation that you received no notice of a board vote. Second, I need to understand exactly how the bylaws were changed and what it means for my position. And third, I need your help planning the response." Andrea immediately called her corporate attorney, who requested the revised bylaws and promised to review them urgently. She then contacted the other genuine board members, confirming none had participated in any vote to remove me. By evening, the legal picture was becoming clear. The bylaw changes did include expanded powers for the board to remove officers, but critically, they still required proper notice of meetings and votes, which had not occurred. Brandon had executed what amounted to a procedurally invalid coup, counting on the shock and humiliation to prevent me from fighting back. More importantly, my 92% ownership remained intact and legally binding. Whatever authority Brandon had claimed over the company's operations, he had no power to change the fundamental ownership structure without my consent. That night, in Andrea's conference room, surrounded by legal pads and coffee cups, a plan took shape. Brandon had called an emergency all-hands meeting for the following morning, presumably to announce the leadership change and present his vision for the company's future. He had also scheduled a shareholder meeting for Friday, legally required, but presumably expected to be a formality given his assumption of control. He had no idea that the shareholder meeting would become the venue for his downfall. The firing that was meant to be my humiliation would instead become the trigger for his own professional demise. As I signed the hotel check-in later that night, the front desk clerk's routine, "Enjoy your stay, Ms. Morgan," struck me as darkly funny. I was effectively homeless in my own company, temporarily exiled from the organization I had created. But unlike Brandon's assumptions, this wasn't the end of my story with Health Pulse, merely the setup for an unexpected final act. First thing Wednesday morning, I met with Emily Blackwell, a corporate attorney specializing in founder disputes. Andrea had arranged the meeting, vouching for Emily's expertise and discretion. In her sleek downtown office with views of the city skyline, I laid out the situation in detail, providing copies of all relevant documents. Emily reviewed the materials methodically, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. After nearly an hour, she looked up with a decisive expression. "The good news, Miss Morgan, is that your position is legally strong. The bylaw modifications Brandon referenced do exist, but they were improperly implemented without the required notice to all board members. More importantly, as 92% shareholder, you retain fundamental control of the company regardless of temporary management changes. So, I can simply walk back in and reclaim my position?" I asked. "Not quite that simple," Emily cautioned. While Brandon's removal action was procedurally flawed, creating immediate grounds for reversal, a direct confrontation could escalate to a messy legal battle that might damage the company. Instead, I recommend using your shareholder authority at Friday's meeting to formally remove him and reinstall yourself. She explained that, as majority shareholder, I had the indisputable right to vote out any board member or officer at a properly constituted shareholder meeting. Since Brandon himself had called this meeting, he had inadvertently created the perfect venue for his own removal. "The key now is preparation," Emily advised. "We need to document the procedural violations, prepare formal resolutions for the shareholder meeting, and gather evidence of any mismanagement or misrepresentation that strengthens your case." With legal strategy in motion, I turned to building support within the company. Though Brandon had blocked my official access, many employees remained loyal. Janet from product development texted that the all-hands meeting had been tense, with Brandon announcing my departure due to strategic differences and promising a more professional,
growth-oriented direction for the company through back
channels. I connected with key team members I trusted. Melissa from finance secretly provided documentation of how Brandon had manipulated financial projections to support his narrative. Robert, our CTO, shared technical roadmap changes Brandon had already implemented, shifting resources away from our core accessibility features toward flashier consumer applications. Most disturbing were the communications from our primary healthcare system partners, forwarded by Diane from marketing. Brandon had already reached out to them, positioning himself as the visionary leader who would elevate Health Pulse beyond its limited founding focus. Several partners had responded with concern about potential changes to the products their patients relied upon. Each piece of evidence revealed Brandon's true intentions more clearly. He planned to fundamentally redirect the company toward more lucrative but less impactful markets, abandoning the mission that had driven our success. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It threatened the company's core purpose and the patients who depended on our technology. Andrea, meanwhile, had been building support among the legitimate board members. The medical advisor and Andrea herself were firmly in my corner. The newer members, Martin and Diana, had initially been swayed by Brandon's narrative, but became more skeptical when presented with evidence of his procedural violations and misrepresentations. Martin was particularly disturbed by the faked board vote, Andrea reported. He values governance integrity and feels manipulated. Diana is more concerned about the potential impact on healthcare partners if we suddenly pivot away from our core offerings. By Thursday afternoon, we had assembled a comprehensive case. Emily prepared formal shareholder resolutions to remove Brandon as CEO and from the board, reinstate me as chief executive, and implement governance safeguards against future coup attempts. The documents were impeccably drafted, leaving no procedural loopholes. We also prepared a detailed presentation documenting Brandon's actions, the systematic exclusion of me from key decisions, manipulation of financial data, misrepresentations to the board and partners, and ultimately, the invalid removal attempt. Each allegation was supported by concrete evidence emails, meeting minutes, witness statements, and financial records. The legal strategy was sound, but I was equally concerned about the human element. Health Pulse wasn't just a corporate entity. It was a community of people committed to our mission. Brandon's actions had created confusion and anxiety throughout the organization. The shareholder meeting needed to not just remove him, but also reassure the team about the company's direction. I drafted a company-wide communication to be sent immediately after the shareholder actions, reaffirming our core mission and addressing concerns about stability. I also prepared individual notes for key team members who had been placed in difficult positions by the power struggle. The night before the shareholder meeting, my support team gathered at Andrea's office for final preparations. Emily reviewed the legal documents once more, while Andrea role-played potential objections Brandon might raise. We anticipated he would be shocked by my appearance at the meeting, but would quickly attempt to delegitimize my authority or delay proceedings. Remember, Emily advised, you have absolute legal standing in that room. As 92% shareholder, your vote is determinative on any resolution. Don't let him rattle you with procedural objections or threats. Stay focused on the formal process. Around midnight, as we were finalizing preparations, I received an unexpected text from Julia, my former assistant. He's in the office shredding documents, lots of them. This suggested Brandon might be destroying evidence of misconduct, adding urgency to our intervention. I barely slept that night at the hotel, reviewing my notes and mentally preparing for the confrontation. This wasn't just about reclaiming my position. It was about protecting the company's mission and the employees who believed in it. Brandon had calculated that I would be too shocked or intimidated to fight back effectively. He had misjudged both my resolve and my preparation. Morning arrived with a mixture of anxiety and determination. I dressed carefully in the same professional outfit I had worn to our first major investor presentation, a subtle reminder of who had built this company from concept to reality. Andrea arrived at my hotel room for a final review of our strategy. Are you ready for this? She asked as we prepared to leave. I took a deep breath, thinking about the 5 years of work that had gone into building Health Pulse, the patients whose lives had been improved by our technology, and the team members who had believed in our mission. More than ready, I replied. He thought he was writing the end of my story at Health Pulse. Instead, he just set up the perfect third act. As we drove to the office for the 9 a.m. shareholder meeting, I felt a surprising sense of calm. Brandon believed he had taken my company. In a few hours, he would discover just how catastrophically he had miscalculated by forgetting the fundamental fact that ownership, not titles, determines ultimate control. The Health Pulse headquarters looked different somehow as our car pulled into the visitor parking space, as if the building itself had changed allegiance overnight. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when he saw me, but noting Andrea's presence and our professional demeanor, simply had us sign in as visitors and directed us to the main conference room. We arrived exactly 5 minutes before the scheduled 9 a.m. start. Emily, our attorney, waited in the lobby as planned. She would enter only if legal representation became necessary. We wanted the initial confrontation to be direct and personal rather than immediately escalating to legal theater. The conference room door was open, revealing Brandon already seated at the head of the table, my former seat, flanked by Patricia from HR and someone I recognized as his personal attorney. The remaining board members sat along one side, with several empty chairs, presumably for other minority shareholders who rarely attended these largely ceremonial meetings. Brandon was mid-sentence about quarterly projections when he noticed me in the doorway. The sudden silence was deafening as every head turned toward us. His expression shifted rapidly from shock to anger to forced composure. "Stephanie," he finally managed, his voice artificially pleasant. "This is a closed corporate meeting. I'm afraid you're no longer authorized to—" "Good morning, everyone," I interrupted calmly, entering the room with Andrea beside me. As the majority shareholder, owning 92% of Health Pulse Technologies, I'm exercising my right to attend this duly noticed shareholder meeting. Brandon's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear, while Patricia looked profoundly uncomfortable. The board members displayed various reactions. Martin and Diana seemed unsurprised, suggesting Andrea had prepared them, while our medical advisor, Dr. Hammond, actually smiled slightly. "There seems to be some confusion," Brandon attempted, regaining his composure. "While you retain your shares pending potential dilution discussions, you've been removed as an officer of the company and have no operational authority. This meeting is to update shareholders on the transition already executed." I placed my portfolio on the table and remained standing, maintaining the psychological advantage of height. "There's no confusion, Brandon. You attempted to remove me through an invalid process based on falsified board approval. No legitimate board vote occurred, as the directors present can confirm." Martin shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "I received no notice of any vote regarding leadership changes." "Nor did I," added Dr. Hammond. Brandon's face flushed.
This
"Is a procedural technicality that doesn't change the fundamental decision. The company needs professional management at this stage. And the separation agreement, which I never signed," I interjected, removing the untouched document from my portfolio and placing it on the table. "Now, as this is a properly noticed shareholder meeting, I move that we proceed with the agenda according to corporate bylaws." Brandon's attorney whispered to him again, more urgently. I could read the realization dawning on Brandon's face. He had made a catastrophic tactical error by calling a formal shareholder meeting while I still held overwhelming voting control. "Perhaps we should reschedule to resolve these unexpected concerns," he suggested, clearly stalling for time. "That won't be necessary," I replied, taking a seat directly opposite him. "As the agenda indicates, this meeting includes other business as a standard item. I have several matters to address under that heading." Andrea distributed printed resolutions to everyone at the table. "For the record, these are formal shareholder resolutions to be entered into the minutes and voted upon during today's meeting." Brandon scanned the documents, his face growing paler with each page. The resolutions were comprehensive: removal of Brandon Hayes from all positions within the company, reinstatement of myself as CEO, reconstitution of the board of directors, and implementation of governance safeguards requiring supermajority approval for future leadership changes. "This is highly irregular," his attorney protested. "Proper notice of specific resolutions is not required under Delaware corporate law for majority shareholders acting at a duly noticed meeting," Andrea completed smoothly. "As counsel well knows, a 92% shareholder can bring business before any properly called shareholder meeting." Brandon attempted one last maneuver. "The board has fiduciary obligations beyond mere share ownership. The documented concerns about company direction under Ms. Morgan's leadership, would those be the same documented concerns you fabricated by manipulating financial projections?" I asked, sliding across copies of the original and altered financial models Melissa had provided. "Or perhaps you're referring to the partner feedback you misrepresented to the board," I added, producing the actual communication threads, showing partners' satisfaction with our current direction. The room fell silent as board members reviewed these materials. Brandon's attorney whispered something that made him shake his head sharply. "Let's proceed with the vote," I said quietly but firmly. Resolution 1. The immediate removal of Brandon Hayes from the position of Chief Executive Officer and from the Board of Directors of Health Pulse Technologies due to procedural violations, misrepresentation of information to the board, and actions contrary to company interests. Andrea, as meeting secretary, called the roll. Stephanie Morgan, 92%.
In favor, I stated clearly. Andrea Wells, 6%.
In favor, Andrea responded. Gregory Walker, 2%. Gregory was absent as expected. With 98% of shares voting in favor, the resolution passes, Andrea announced formally. Brandon sat frozen, his carefully constructed power play collapsing around him. We proceeded through the remaining resolutions methodically. My reinstatement as CEO, appointment of new board members, implementation of governance protections, and finally, a formal censure of Brandon's actions to be entered into corporate records. Each vote followed the same pattern, with my 92% and Andrea's 6% creating an insurmountable 98% majority. The meeting became a methodical dismantling of Brandon's authority, piece by piece, following impeccable corporate procedure. When the final vote concluded, I addressed the room. As reinstated Chief Executive Officer, I have a few immediate orders of business. First, Brandon, please surrender all company property immediately. Security will escort you to collect personal belongings from the executive office, which is now returned to its rightful occupant. I pressed the intercom button, and security entered promptly, the same officers who had escorted me out 2 days earlier, now visibly uncomfortable with the reversed situation. Second, all employees will receive communication within the hour, addressing the leadership restoration and reaffirming our company mission and values. Third, I'm calling an all-hands meeting at 11 a.m. to address questions directly. Brandon finally found his voice. You can't possibly think this ends here. The operational changes I've implemented, the partner communications, the strategic redirections, will all be reviewed and appropriate determinations made. I finished for him. Any actions taken without proper authority may be subject to reversal. Now I believe security is waiting to assist with your departure. As Brandon was escorted out, his expression of stunned disbelief provided no satisfaction, only confirmation of how thoroughly he had underestimated me and the legal protections of majority ownership. The remaining board members sat in awkward silence until I addressed them directly. I understand Brandon may have misled you regarding company performance and direction. I'm open to discussing any legitimate concerns about our strategy, but those conversations will happen with complete transparency and accurate information. Martin spoke first. For what it's worth, I had no knowledge of the invalid removal attempt. Brandon presented your absence as a mutually agreed transition already in progress. Noted, I replied. I suggest we schedule a proper board meeting next week to reset our governance and communication processes. As the meeting concluded and attendees filed out, I remained seated, taking a moment to absorb what had just occurred. In the span of 45 minutes, I had reclaimed the company I built, reversed a hostile takeover attempt, and restored the proper leadership structure, all through the power of ownership I had so carefully preserved throughout our growth. Andrea stayed behind, closing the door for privacy. That went even more smoothly than we expected, she observed. Ownership trumps titles, I replied simply. Brandon was so focused on claiming the CEO position that he forgot who actually owns this company. An expensive lesson in corporate governance. What now? She asked. I gathered my materials, ready to reclaim my office and address the understandably confused employees. Now we rebuild what he damaged, reassure our partners and team, and get back to our actual mission, creating technology that helps real people manage their health. As I walked through the office toward my rightful place, employees stared in amazement, whispers spreading rapidly. The company Grapevine, which had broadcast my humiliation 2 days earlier, now carried a very different message. The founder had returned, ownership had prevailed, and the brief coup had been decisively reversed. The shareholder meeting had indeed been pure revenge, not through pettiness or cruelty, but through the elegant application of corporate law and the power of majority ownership. Brandon had orchestrated my public humiliation. In return, I had delivered a masterclass in corporate governance that ended his brief reign before it truly began. The weeks following Brandon's removal were both challenging and clarifying. My first priority was stabilizing the organization after the leadership whiplash. The all-hands meeting that morning was packed, with remote employees joining by video and the conference room overflowing with anxious faces. I know the past few days have been confusing and concerning for everyone, I began. Let me be clear about what happened and where we go from here. Brandon Hayes attempted an unauthorized removal of me as CEO, which was invalid both procedurally and legally. As 92% owner of Health Pulse, I exercise my shareholder rights to correct this situation and restore proper leadership, I addressed the underlying issues directly. This wasn't just about titles or personal conflicts. It was about our company's fundamental mission and direction. Brandon was steering us away from our core purpose of creating accessible health technology for underserved populations, particularly the elderly and chronically ill. That mission isn't just my personal preference. It's the foundation of our success, and the reason many of you chose to work here. The immediate organizational changes were significant. Patricia from HR, who had actively participated in my removal, resigned the same day. Brandon's attorney was replaced with our previous corporate counsel. Several mid-level managers Brandon had brought in from his network chose to leave, recognizing the dramatic shift in leadership philosophy. Rebuilding trust was harder than restoring organizational charts. I scheduled individual conversations with key team members, acknowledging the difficult position they had been placed in, and reaffirming my commitment to the values that had originally brought us together. Some of these conversations were painful. Melissa from finance tearfully apologized for not speaking up sooner about the financial manipulations. I was afraid of losing my job, she admitted. Brandon made it clear that loyalty to him was a condition of employment. The fault isn't yours, I assured her. He created a culture of fear deliberately. Moving forward, we'll build stronger whistleblower protections and ethical reporting channels. Our external relationships required careful attention as well. I personally called our major healthcare partners to clarify the leadership situation and reaffirm our commitment to their patients. Most expressed relief, having been concerned about Brandon's hints of strategic redirection. A few had already received proposals from him for significant price increases and reduced customization support. The board underwent thoughtful reconstruction. Martin and Diana remained, now fully aware of the manipulation they had experienced and committed to stronger governance oversight. We added 2 new members with deep experience in healthcare technology and strong ethical reputations. Most importantly, we revised the bylaws to require my explicit approval for any leadership changes regardless of board votes. The company culture didn't heal overnight. The trust Brandon had broken between departments, among colleagues between leadership and staff required consistent attention and genuine commitment to restore. We instituted quarterly anonymous culture surveys, regular town halls where difficult questions were encouraged, and a renewed emphasis on our founding mission in all decision-making. 6 months after the shareholder meeting showdown, Health Pulse had largely recovered its equilibrium. We launched our 3rd-generation product on schedule, with enhanced accessibility features that our elderly users had specifically requested. Customer satisfaction scores returned to their previously high levels, and employee retention stabilized. The experience transformed my approach to leadership. I had always focused primarily on product vision and customer needs, trusting others to handle operational details. Now I recognize the importance of governance structures, formal protections, and vigilant oversight of company culture. Passion for mission remains essential, but protecting that mission requires attention to power dynamics and legal frameworks. I became more selective about who joined our executive team, prioritizing alignment with our core values over impressive resumes. Candidates now underwent extensive reference checks focusing on ethics and leadership style, not just achievements. Most importantly, I implemented distributed authority structures that prevented any single executive from consolidating too much control. 1 year after Brandon's attempted coup, we celebrated Health Pulse's 6th anniversary with a company-wide gathering. Looking around at the team, some who had been with me from the beginning, others who joined along the way, all united by commitment to our mission, I felt profound gratitude for the lessons we had learned together. Our journey hasn't always been smooth, I acknowledged in my remarks. Last year taught us that building something valuable means also building proper protections around it. But it also confirmed what I believed from the beginning, that a company focused on genuine human needs, operated with integrity, can overcome even the most challenging obstacles. The professional aftermath for Brandon proved significant.
His
Reputation in our industry suffered as the story spread through business networks. Several companies that had considered him for executive roles reconsidered after learning about his ethical lapses at Health Pulse, while he eventually secured another position. It was at a much smaller company with limited growth potential. As for me, the experience reinforced my conviction in the power of ownership. By maintaining 92% of my company despite multiple funding rounds, I had preserved the ability to protect our mission when it was threatened. The conventional wisdom in startup circles often pushes founders to accept significant dilution to attract investment. My story became a counterexample, referenced in business school cases about founder control and mission protection. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome emerged from our Founders Protection Initiative, a program we launched to advise other entrepreneurs on legal structures that safeguard their vision and control. Through workshops, mentorship, and legal resources, we help dozens of founders, particularly women and underrepresented minorities, establish stronger governance protections in their startups. The question I'm asked most often when sharing this story is whether I regret hiring Brandon in the first place. The honest answer is no. The painful episode ultimately strengthened both the company and my leadership. We built better governance systems, clarified our mission, and created a more resilient organization. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our most difficult challenges. For any founder watching this, remember that titles and roles matter far less than ownership and control. Build something remarkable, protect it vigorously, and never forget that the company you create is ultimately yours to direct toward the impact you envision. Have you ever had to protect something you built from those who would take it in the wrong direction? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with other entrepreneurs who might benefit from these lessons. Thank you for joining me on this unexpected chapter of my founder's journey. May your own path be smoother, but equally rewarding.